listening to Steel Roses Podcast, a podcast for women by women. My name is Jenny.
And I'm Melissa. And we're here to bring you honest content in a space where we can still be real about the everyday challenges for women.
Right, exactly. And as Melissa mentioned, we're really committed in this podcast. I can't even tell you the amount of discussions Melissa and I have on a weekly basis as to what we're going to chat about, because there's so many things that we can address that are not talked about openly. So bear with us as we go topic by topic, but always feel free to reach out to us via Instagram or our email. If you have any topic ideas that you really want us to dig into, we'd love to hear it because we go through this a couple times a week, right?
That's right.
And our Instagram is at Steel Roses Podcast. And our email account is steelrosespodcast@gmail.com. So I don't know if everybody is aware, but this month, the month of May, is actually Mental Health Awareness Month. This is something that Melissa and I have been talking back and forth about what we could address for women with mental health. It's a huge topic that is wildly underaddressed as a specific topic. Personally, I, in my, early 20s, struggled with severe depression, anxiety for a really long time. And I had to work really hard for several years to find a way to manage that. My tipping point was, it's interesting. It was actually in a class, and the professor, he said some statistic, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was really depressing. And he said something to the effect of that women that are depressed, women that have anxiety, women that are in abusive relationships, he said something like, and it was a he said something like 90% or 80% of women that are in those situations never break the cycle. And we mentioned this on a previous episode. If there's one thing that is a catalyst for me, it's a challenge. And that was almost like, Melissa, I'm not even kidding. I remember this moment distinctly because he said the stat, and in my head, I was like, oh, no, I don't think so. I'm not being not me. I'm not a statistic. Like, this is Jenny, you're better than this. But there's, and I've worked really hard to make sure that I was able to handle that kind of stuff. And I used to wonder, I don't understand like how this happened to me or why I went through this, because not everybody goes through those types of struggles with like depression and anxiety. I often thought back like, oh, well, how did this happen? And Melissa, I don't know if you had the same type of experience in terms of like the thought process, but to me, I felt like our generation of parents, bless them, they did their best, but they weren't people that talked about mental health. Like anything related to mental health was more like, all right, suck it up, buttercup, go do your job.
No, exactly. I think, and I think it's, and I made a note to address this later on in the episode too, but I think it stems from, it's like, that's the way their parents dealt with it. So each generation tries to do better than the last, right?
Yes.
But I think it has come a long way because, like you said, I literally made a note with like, was mental health even a term back then? Like, didn't people talk about that?
They didn't talk about it. They really didn't. And even like ways to cope, and not cope is not the right word. Ways to manage your mental health. I'm turning 40 this year. Yay. So I'm mentioning that in case any of you are in the same age range as myself. But that, my parents are now in their 70s or late 60s, early 70s. And, developing and managing like skills that will help you address mental health issues. They don't know anything about that stuff. Like they were more the generation of like, that's it. Like you're not dealing with it in a real way. I was like 22 when I first really started to dig in and be like, I need to figure this out. So I'm better. I'm a better person. Our parents really didn't do anything to address their own things until they were much older in their 50s and 60s.
No, and I think again, it's sort of like each generation, if it's happening earlier, like if we've addressed these things, by 20s, 30s, then my only hope is that maybe it's not even something that our children have to address because it's something that we're aware and monitoring as they grow, right?
Right, exactly.
But I think you made a good point, and looking at our notes, because guys, we actually prep and have notes. But I think one of the things that you were going to talk about was that how many times you were kind of brushed off about mental health issues that you've tried to bring to attention to. And I don't know about you, but that's happened with me in terms of medical professionals. Like I have a very specific memory, and this kind of it coincides with like postnatal care, but I remember you had to deal with mental health pretty early on, like you were in your 20s. I was fortunate in that I didn't really experience it to the degree until after I gave birth to my daughter, and and I remember feeling like, oh, like I was always wired anxiously, but then it stepped up a level. And I remember talking to my doctor, and I was like, you remember they make you take those little questionnaires? And I remember I was cleared on the depression scale, but on the anxiety scale, I was elevated. And I remember saying to her specifically, yeah, I think my anxiety is high right now. And she goes, oh, you're just a first time mom. You're wired anxiously because you tend to be a perfectionist. So, you don't worry, give it another month and you'll be fine. But I remember looking at that paper later on and I'm like, it was significantly elevated. Like, so, in terms of, yeah, that sort of kind of still like brushing under the rug type of thing. And I know you've experienced that too.
Right, exactly. Well, so it's interesting because it did seem to like I did have an idea of how to deal with that kind of thing before having kids. So I did start working on it fairly early. And then once I had the kids, I did recognize it pretty quickly. Like in most situations, I was able to, it took me, maybe a couple of weeks, but I would remember having these aha moments like, wait, hold on, Jenny. This isn't you. This is an imbalance in your brain. And I instinctively knew, okay, and this isn't a plug, but I was like, what kind of natural things can I do to balance myself out? And I called one of my aunts from Pennsylvania, who's basically an encyclopedia of natural methods. Shout out to my aunt out in Williamsport, because she's basically an encyclopedia of how to naturally address problems. And I called her and I was like, I don't know what to do. And she said, all right, take this, this, and this. And it worked and it helped. And it didn't take it all the way away, but it was a step in the right direction. So that was I was incredibly grateful for that. But I mean, outside of mom depression after you have your kid and you're imbalanced a bit, the discussion around mental health. I mean, literally we could do an episode a week on mental health and separate topics and just like dig deep. Melissa had mentioned, and she kind of plugged it, like I was able to start like fairly early down that path. I was always a self-help book, self-research, like get myself, make myself aware of like what's going on so I can help myself, because as you all are starting to get to know me, I'm not somebody who really is like going to wait around and hope somebody else helps me. But not everybody thinks that way. And we have a whole generation right now of kids that are being faced with even more challenges than when we were growing up. Because when we were growing up, your social interactions were limited to live in-person interactions. Now, there's a huge world of interactions that doesn't stop. And you basically are, it doesn't stop. And you're basically you're putting your kid out there into this social media world without the tools to really properly address how social media is affecting them. I mean, social media it started blowing up. I mean, it's been present since, I'm going to date myself, but Facebook actually came out while I was in college. I remember when it started and I was like, what is that? I'm not doing that. So it's funny. I remember the start of these things and now I feel like I'm part of history. It's disgusting and kind of like, it's freaking me out. But anyway, there again, there's a whole like world of it being like totally blown out now because of when the pandemic started, it really picked up pace. And now we have our kids consuming these images and they're consuming this. Yeah. Like, and then they're putting stuff out there too.
No, it's really, it's crazy to think in terms of mental health, the worldwide impact that social media continues to have. And people talk about this, like this constant need for validation from strangers. And this is both, I think it stems generation. This is both kids, teenagers who are, teenagers are trying to get jobs as TikTokers now. like that's their career aspiration is to become like a viral TikToker. But this also affects, women our age, older generations. People have been consumed by social media across the board, I think. And again, it stems back for this need for validation. There's all these constant comparisons, especially amongst high schoolers. How many likes did I get? Why did so-and-so like your picture, not mine? Which sounds so trivial, but I think that when you put yourself back, can you imagine being in high school now with social media? Like
No.
I could, high school was tough enough, but I can't imagine.
No, I can't.
And it worries me especially for our girls. I think there's this pressure of creating sort of this perfect image. Look how beautiful I am. Look how skinny I am. Look how, and do you remember that New York Times article about the newlywed couple that went on their honeymoon and then they came back and they almost got divorced and like legally separated because the wife, the bride, was so focused on taking selfies and the perfect picture and posting them on social media that literally they almost got divorced. Like it was this huge thing. And I was like, oh my God. Like,
well, I mean, I could see it being a problem, especially because like, and I know you actively try to do this. You actively are in the moment. Like everybody who's listening, I used to complain to Melissa all the time and be like, why don't you have your phone? What's wrong with you? Can you please text me back? Like pick up your damn phone. You've always been really good about just like disconnecting from it. You're not, ingrained. Neither am I, because personally, but I'm much older. Personally, if I want to share something, it's going to be a one-on-one interaction. I'm going to say, hey, Melissa, look at this cool video of my kids. They're being hilarious. Or look at this hilarious picture.
Which she does. She just sent a cute one.
Which I do. Yeah. No. Well, funny/scary, mostly because it was funny/scary because, as Melissa just said, our kids are growing up in the age of social media, and what they're seeing on TV is affecting them. My daughters are 6 years old and they joke around and ask me to video them so they could do a TikTok because they don't quite understand
what it is,
but they know the dance moves. And so they have me do it and I love it. It's adorable / it terrifies me and to my core. But that also brings me to an important point here. My husband and I very actively are careful with our word choices and we're aggressive with the messaging that we're giving our kids with self-respect and, keeping things personal and just literally it's exhausting, but almost every single time, every opportunity I have, I try to ingrain in them some sense of like self, even though they're 6 years old and 7 years old, and they're like, what are you talking about? But the part that is concerning about them being exposed so early, and not a lot of people, it's not like they have a TikTok account. You know, I let them watch YouTube sometimes when they come home from school. Like, it's not like they're on social media, but even watching the YouTube videos, they're starting to pick up on the image of the beautiful girl that is being put out there. And, you know, I think about a year ago or so, I called up my sister-in-law out in Pennsylvania, and I was like, you're not going to believe this. The twins are already concerned about being fat. It already came up.
Oh my gosh.
You know, and then most recently, one of them said to me, like, Mommy, I just wish my stomach was flat. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You're 6. Like, but I didn't say that. I was cautious with how I talked about it with her because I wanted to make sure I gave her the right message. I didn't want to disregard what she was saying, even though she's only 6. I wanted her to hear me in a real way about like, well, okay, why are you concerned about that? And let's talk about, you know, why you don't need to be concerned about that. And then if you really are, what's a healthy way to address this? It sounds nuts, but if I don't do this now when they're 6, they're not going to be armed for this when they're 12.
Agreed.
There was a
And what did you so wait, where did that stem from? Was it social media related?
Let's take a quick break.
Are you interested in podcasting but not sure where to start? My name is Jenny Benitez, and I'm here to help guide you through your podcast launch and maintenance. Check out the link in the episode description for Podcasting Unboxed, your comprehensive startup guide. I am very excited to work with you.
Yeah, well, so it was like a combination because my girls are, I'm tall and and one of my daughters takes after me, and she's tall, like she's really growing and everything. And she complained about it because she was comparing herself to her peers who are petite, and and that, but the knowledge of that comparison, I think it stemmed from, I'm seeing these images online of these perfect looking girls, not online, on YouTube, of these perfect looking girls. And then, I'm seeing that my friends are petite and teeny and adorable. How come I don't look like that? I want to look like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, hell no, we're not. You're not. No. Mm-mm. So, the other thing that, I was actually really happy to see, that impacted me and actually was part of what stemmed like this whole discussion, because I sent it to Melissa and I was like, you need to see this. Dove ran a campaign. I think it started this month. I literally saw it on LinkedIn and legitimately started crying because it like hit me to my core. If you're listening to this, you should really Google it, look it up. If you go to the Dove campaign, it's like #KidsOnlineSafety. They're running this whole campaign where they have this video and they show almost like the life story of this young girl who was watching social media, and, you know, she started out like she's a regular kid, and over time being exposed to social media, she developed a severe eating disorder, and it took her years to crawl out of that.
Yeah. And she was like writing notes to herself saying, I'm so ugly compared to these girls. I'm taking measurements of all of her, like the size of her waist, the size of her thighs, like and comparing them to the girls that she was viewing. And she was already thin. Like, she was a cute, beautiful, young girl. And it was just crazy. When you sent it to me, I was like, wow, I was not prepared.
Yeah. Well, I think, to be honest, everybody, part of the reason why I kind of burst into tears too, shout out to my mom real quick, because I used to tease her all the time when I was growing up. Like, what are you crying for? What's the matter with you? Like, she used to cry over everything, like puppy commercials. She still does it, and we still tease her. But the part that drives me nuts is now I do it. It's like,
But I
On,
think it shows the impact
yeah,
of because now this it showed her from when she was probably like 6, 7, 9, in that age range, all the way up to her late teens, early 20s. But it goes to show you the social media, I think, and mental health, it's intertwined and it affects everyone from, like you're saying, 6, 7, 8 years old, all the way up to again, like the story of the newlyweds. It's affecting relationships into people that are in their 20s, 30s, and beyond. So again, I think it's just something that now that we're aware of it, that it's something that we can do better for our kids,
right, exactly. I had read, again, I'm real big on like reading and educating myself and self-help. And I was a psychology major. So I was always very, very into the inner workings of the mind and how we can combat certain things and just the different types of mental disease issues that, my goal at one point, when I was, when I graduated high school, I wanted to be a psychologist, which is why I dug so deep into this kind of content. I had actually read a book. I picked up a book, literally just self-education, called Reviving Ophelia. And it actually tackled this pretty heavily. The author is Dr. Mary Pfeiffer, or Pfeiffer. I might be mispronouncing her name. If you look it up on Amazon or wherever, and read the summary, it's honestly anyone who has a daughter should take a look at this. It is wildly impactful. I do want to read something directly about that book, and this is not this is not a kick. This is not like a plug
This is not an
situation.
ad.
It's not an ad. I really, really strongly recommend this book. I actually am planning to reread it because I read it so long ago. But just pulling from the book, I just want to put a little summary here that I actually thought was really important. In her work, she finds that in spite of the women's movement, which has empowered adult women in some ways, teenage girls today are having a harder time than ever before because of higher levels of violence and sexism. The current crisis of adolescence, frequent suicide attempts, dropping out of school, and running away from home, teenage pregnancies in unprecedented numbers, and an epidemic of eating disorders are caused not so much by dysfunctional families or incorrect messages from parents as they are by our media-saturated, lookist, girl-destroying culture. Young teenagers are not developmentally equipped to meet the challenges that confront them. As they encounter situations that are simply too complex for them to handle, their self-esteem crumbles. The dangers young women face today can jeopardize their futures, and it is critical that we understand the circumstances and take measures to correct them. Now, I'm going to look it up real quick, Reviving Ophelia.
Yeah, see, I need to go get a copy of this book now.
What I wanted to look up quickly is this book was published in 1994. And at that point in time is when that statement was made that they are, and that was before social media.
Yeah.
Think about that now.
It's like that on steroids now.
If that problem was present in 1994, that means right now in 2023, our kids, our daughters, our sons, because I don't want to discount the boys, like they're getting images too.
Yes.
They are being flooded and they do not know how to handle it.
No, it's a really good point. And the question becomes, what do you do?
Right.
Do you completely take away? You can't, right? You can't block out. This is unfortunately the world we live in. And as much as like you try to limit, they'll still be exposed either via their friends or so. How do you address that? Which I'll be coming to you then.
So the way that, and my husband and I, we actually talk about this extensively because we both very strongly feel like we're preparing our kids for battle, essentially. Like we are making sure that we are doing everything we can to direct from home. And the way that we're doing that, and I'm not saying this is a perfect method, but this is how we're handling it, because we both have our feelings and have our own experiences about how we were exposed to things or not exposed to things. And we had wished that it had been different. We introduce the ideas to our kids, and we're introducing them to the things. And when we see that, they're looking at a YouTube video that we think is a little problematic or whatever, we address it in the moment. Oh, well, what are you looking at there? Oh, okay. Well, you want me to talk to you? You want me to explain that to you? Or, oh, what do you mean about this? And if they come home, and our kids are actually pretty decent about coming home and saying, Mommy, I saw this today. And we're like, okay, well, why don't we talk about that? And we are driving the conversation and making them aware now, because we want to be the one who gives them that information. We don't want them to stumble out into the world and then be like, oh, no one ever told me about X, Y, and Z. Maybe I want to give it a shot. Like, no, man, we already told you about that. Not to do it.
And in that sense, you're able to build their foundation, with them. And so when they go out into the world and get exposed to everything that all of us are exposed to, it's like, well, then that foundation's set and it doesn't crack and crumble, like that passage was saying. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And outside of worrying about our kids and their mental health development, and this is why earlier I said this is a massive topic. We could talk for days about this. Outside of our kids and what they're having to deal with, women already, and this is a stat. I'm not going to bore anybody with wild stats today, but statistically, women are at higher risk for mental health issues. And I have one tiny stat that I'm going to tell everybody. 29 million American women, or about 23% of the female population, have experienced a diagnosed mental health related disorder in the last year alone. Just in the last year alone. That's only the diagnosed. 29 million American women are diagnosed with mental health problems. But what about everyone who's not diagnosed? I bet you would triple that number.
Yeah.
And there's tons of reasons for that, because it's not just social media impactful. We talked about hormones in episode 2, where we did the mom archives. We talked about hormones there and how that impacts. But, I was thinking when we were leading up to recording, I was actually thinking to myself about personally, right? I'm juggling full-time job, full-time mom, managing the household and the kids and everything. And then obviously we're doing the podcast. Melissa is doubled up on work, and then she's a full-time mother, and she's doing the podcast. It's a tremendous amount of pressure that already is,
which we do to ourselves.
Right. Well, no, we did. I mean, we did self-select this situation, so I'm not complaining, but I'm saying,
And I think that we've always been the type to hustle. But I think we've been partially socialized to put that pressure to succeed, to do well, to maximize every opportunity that we have, right? So I think and then also the two of us are sort of recovering perfectionists, right? We're trying to break that. But I think that's something that a lot of women deal with, is that need for perfectionism, right? So again, it's like you're saying, it's not just one thing. You get it from work, you get it from home life, you get it from pressure from social media, you get it from, there's so many different avenues. I think both men and women nowadays, it's just this overstimulation to do well, right? To succeed. And then it all it can come crashing down if you're not careful.
Yeah. Yeah. And beyond the perfection factor, there's also this innate pressure, and I don't know exactly why. I'm still researching this, but there's this tremendous amount of pressure, and there's pressure on men too. I don't want to take away from that, but it seems like, there's always this expectation for women to bear the brunt of like specific things and specifically home life, right? And, I think a lot about stay-at-home moms, because when my kids go to school and I get to work, while yes, my work can be stressful and occasionally my eye twitches, I have a break from my kids being home and being at each other's throats. When you're a stay-at-home mom, like even if your kids go to school, you don't have that, that other thing that mentally is going to stimulate you. And your job technically is 24 hours a day, especially during the summertime. There is no PTO. Like I could take a vacation day and from 9:15 to 3:45, I'm on PTO because my kids are at school. But like when you're a stay-at-home mom and this is your job, that's a 24-hour a day job that you never get a break from. And that in itself is something that like really nobody thinks about. Nobody talks about like, oh, well, how dealing with that, because not for nothing, but like everybody needs a break. Everybody needs a minute to like gather themselves and really like think through like, okay, well, personally, am I addressing my own needs? Like there's a whole world there that unless you're in it, you don't really know. And because men will never be in that position, I'm going to complain for a minute, because men will never be in that position. There's really not a lot out there about that and being a stay-at-home mom and what that job is like. And I am calling it a job because it legitimately is a job.
That's a job. And I think for our listeners that don't have children or are single, I think women, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because it's not appreciated if you're a stay-home mom. It's not, that's not quote unquote real work.
No, it's not real work,
right? Which of course we both know.
We definitely don't.
But even those, I just turned 35. And a lot of my friends, if they're single and they're, focusing on their careers, they've often told me they get the pressure. Well, you're single, you don't have a family, so it's expected that you're going to work, right? You remember what that was like. You're going to work the double time. You're going to do overtime. You're going to do, and I think, not discounting for men too, I think that they also get that pressure. Well, you have if they have a family and their wife is a stay-home mom, you can focus here. And
right.
Again, it's just like this I think there's pressure no matter where we look nowadays. The only way that I think our generation is going to beat it is if you make mental health a priority. Like that's the only way that you can sort of come out on top, I think.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it's very nice to see that like there's more awareness and there's more attention to it. And in some instances, I think maybe sometimes it overly complicates, and it's hard, I think, for a lot of people to determine like legitimate, factual, and not because anybody's not smart, and that's not what I'm saying. I mean more like there's so much information out there that it's hard to decipher like, oh, was this a legitimate source or is this just somebody's opinion? Like even I've gotten duped a couple of times when I thought I was reading a relevant article and then I get to the end and I was like, oh wait, no, this was an ad. Like this happens because there's a ton of information out there, but then also there's a lack of information out there, because if you're looking specifically for mental health related to women, you're going to find some information, but you're not going to find a lot of information, which is a whole can of worms in terms of the lack when it comes to awareness for anything related to women, which is why we're doing this podcast, because this needs to be heavily addressed. So like if you're, feeling like, oh, you have this, like, why is this cloud residually following me? Why do I always feel sad or anxious? And, sometimes there's not even a word for it. Like even if you feel like technically quote unquote happy, 70% of the day, but then 30% of the day you're like snapping and off the charts, like, stressed out. Well, you're not really okay. You have to self-evaluate. Like, you have to take that minute. No one's going to do it for you. You have to like take a second and say, like, I don't want to live like this, or I don't want my kids to see me like this, or I don't want my partner to see me like this. Like, there's a lot of like self-awareness that has to happen. And it's just not always, it's not, if you're not raised with people talking about it, like I happen to stumble upon it myself, but like, if you're not, aware and you're just kind of plugging along and you think that that's normal, it's like, that sucks. No, let's talk about it. Like, let's make people aware. Like, this is real and you can actually really address it. And it doesn't mean you have to take medication. Like, that's not always the answer. And medication takes time to sort out. It's not like a lot of folks will go see a doctor and say, like, I'm depressed, give me something. And they get prescribed something and then they take it for a couple of days and they're like, this isn't working. That's not really how it works. Like,
yeah, no.
If you're going to go that route, it takes a lot of time for that kind of medical intervention to work. So you have to be patient. And B, you also have to be patient with the method that you're using, because that's not an exact science either. Your doctors will say, like, well, let's try this and see how you feel. Okay, if that didn't work, let's try this. It takes a lot of time and it can be extremely frustrating, which is, I think, a big reason why you don't go, is because you're like, I don't have time for this. I mean, personally, I was supposed to go and get testing done for a health related situation, and I still haven't gone because I don't have time for that.
Well, and I think that I know I've never been on medication for depression or anxiety, but I know dozens of people that are on light antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications. But I always stop because some of them are not also in therapy, and I'm not knocking anyone, and there's absolutely no judgment. But I'm always like, well, what's the goal? Is medication now acting sort of like as a Band-Aid, or are these two things supposed to go hand in hand to sort of address it? I think sometimes, in some instances, it's like medication has been like a societal sort of Band-Aid to sort of normalize this overload of stress and pressure that all of us are dealing with.
Right. So as opposed to going to the root, what is the actual problem?
Exactly.
It's like, here, just take
like the
this.
actual health part in mental health. I think,
yes,
I think there's pharmaceutical companies and like you're saying, ads, and there's just so much pressure to solve this quick, So I think like what you're saying is, and what you've said throughout this episode is, like, dig in, do the work, address the root of the issue. That's something that I would like to carry forward. And in terms of like, when this topic really made me stop and pause and think, okay, like how am I going to approach this as my daughter grows up and as she's exposed to social media and exposed to these different things, and what's my message going to be about mental health? And I think and it sounds corny, but it really did make me stop and pause. And it's like, okay, no, like you said, you're bringing certain messages to your kids and you're making sure of being aware and sort of monitoring the thoughts that they're having. And it's like, yeah, no, I think not only do I have to do that for myself, but I'm also going to do that for my daughter going forward. Because again, I think, like you said, the messages that are out there about mental health right now, it's like, oh, just grind through. And it's like, no, that's not what I want to take into the next generation.
Right. Exactly. And that's something that, like, Melissa and I actually talk quite a bit about, like, why can't we be the generation that changes, and makes things better? Like, I don't want to be the generation, and it's not me. I think I'm like I looked it up because I never can remember. I think I'm like considered an old millennial because I was born in 83. I'm like, it's funny because when I hear things about millennials, I'm like, oh, yikes. I was like, no. I'm going to be 40. I don't think that applies. But like, there's just so much out there. And what I wanted to say was that there traditionally was a lot of shame around mental health issues. If you had a mental health issue, it was like, oh, look down upon and hide that. And you don't want to talk about that. And, push that in the corner and keep going. And don't let anyone know that you feel that way. And that has provided a culture of like shame for that, when it really should be something that's like, no, we can address this. You don't have to feel shame, because this is not technically in your control, because some of this is, fed to us through the media. And then some of it can actually just be hormonal, as we've talked about. Some of it is just truly a chemical imbalance in your brain. Our brain is a wildly complex thing that we do not understand. And there's so much to it. And if you're experiencing any level of like depression, anxiety, just, what is it, the baby blues? What a cute way to say postpartum depression and not even really address it. The baby blues. Like, can you give me a more BS? Like, don't even get me started. I really, the whole thing around the rhetoric around like that is, I can complain about that for a while. But yeah, like it's like that term alone, calling it the baby blues discounts your feelings. It makes you feel stupid. Oh, you got the baby blues? Like what?
Women's health, especially women's mental health, is something that Jenny is very passionate about. So.
Yeah. Health-related women's issues, and I'm super excited to talk about that with everybody. And I have an idea for a guest speaker for that particular topic, because health-related women's issues is wildly under researched, under discussed, under addressed, and it's
understudied, underfunded.
Everything. And forget about like women in mental health. It's like, oh, you're all right. You can cope, as you can figure it out. You'll be fine. It's a huge topic, and it's just something that I'm incredibly passionate about, as Melissa said. So there's so much to discuss with this. We're literally just like tip of the iceberg. Yeah, literally tip of the iceberg with this topic, because it's just something that's so under discussed and needs to be addressed on so many levels. It's just insane. The one thing that I will say here is that, and if you're short,
what's our key takeaway?
Yeah. So the one thing that I want to plug, because we covered so many different kinds of things just now. The one thing that I want to plug, and I'm going to say this pretty much every single time, do some self-research. And I don't mean like, a random blog or whatever. I mean like actual research. Look up some articles online that are from, relevant journals, and look up you can Google articles, and you can look at TED Talks, and there's a lot of information that's out there that is readily available and legitimate that you can access to help yourself. And I'm a huge proponent of, you need to figure this out, because no one is going to figure it out for you. And if you're not affected by it, that's fine. But your sister, your mother, your daughter, somebody might be, and you need to self-educate, because we have to make this shift. We have to change this. Melissa, anything from your side?
I think my biggest takeaway, I think from this episode, from this week, that what we've been talking about is like you're saying, self-research, self-awareness, self-monitoring, because again, not to put more pressure on ourselves, but like you said, no one's going to do this for us. And what we're able to learn now will be able to pass down to other generations. I knew from probably the moment I was born, but I know from a young child, I've always been wired anxiously. I couldn't put my finger on what it was until I got into college. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's anxiety. Is that anxiety? That's that feeling like restlessness and worry about, grades or whatever it was at the time. Oh, that's anxiety, and then, but if we're able to start that conversation, like you said, 6-7 years old, just to be self-aware, it's okay to feel like this. Come tell me, we can talk about it. That's a whole different message. And again, I really only put my finger on it in my 20s, because my mother had figured out she's also wired anxiously, you know? And that was when she was in her, you know, late 40s, early 50s. And it's like, if we're getting better each generation, then hopefully this doesn't have to be a topic. This is something that can be ingrained for our daughters, for our children. So that was my takeaway is, okay, this is how I'm going to approach this going forward. And I think it sounds so silly, but if anybody listening does the same thing, you know what I mean? It seems like, oh, we're all little ants, but if everybody does this, then it becomes more of a societal change, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's exactly the point, is like, if we could make this societal change, not at the individual level, or start at the individual level and make it a movement.
And make it
That's
grow.
the only way we're going to be able to make this world better for the next generation, all the generations to follow. We have to make things better and not, you know, continue on with you know, poor patterns, especially for this kind of topic.
So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I know we covered a pretty broad range today, but we appreciate everybody listening and, you know, joining us on this journey as we talk about things like this. And, you know, if you're interested in hearing more like statistics, or you're looking for research articles, if you want us to, we're not healthcare professionals, but we can certainly point you to some of our favorite areas to look at. Feel free to reach out to us via Instagram or email Steel Roses Podcast for Instagram, and Steel Roses Podcast at gmail.com for our email. We definitely want to hear from you. And real quick teaser, we are in the process of developing merch. So continue to listen, because we are going to be doing some giveaways for the inaugural launch of our Steel Roses Podcast merchandise. So stay tuned for that too.
And our ultimate goal, we have a website in works as well. So our goal is when we're putting out these episodes and we're talking about a big topic like this. Now, this was sort of like an introductory topic to women's health, women's mental health. We'll obviously be digging into more specific subtopics as we move forward. But again, our goal is when we release something like this, we'll be able to post something on our website where we can lead you here. Hey, here's our 5 favorite books on the X, or this was a really informative article on what we talked about. So our goal is to be able to sync this up, so that way you'll also have sort of the resources that we're looking at as well.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you all for listening today. Yeah, we love doing this. We love it so much that we get up at 5 a.m. To record, because we have to do that before our kids wake up, which I think I can hear footsteps upstairs. So thank you all for listening. We really appreciate you. We're really excited to engage with you. So please hit us up. Again, at Steel Roses Podcast on Instagram, or steelrosespodcast at gmail.com. Have a great week, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Yep. See you next Monday.